And if you want to start by talking about, you were the first surgeon to perform on Drew, is that correct?
Yeah, I first saw him in the trauma bay at Orange Park Medical Center, and he came in actually talking, kind of oriented with it, but pretty quickly, you know, we appreciated that he had 5 gunshot wounds, 3 of which were in his abdomen and pelvis, and we started transfusing him a lot of blood and took him pretty quickly to the operating room. And there, you know, we found that he had a pretty significant liver injury. He was hemorrhaging out from his liver, and performed pretty extensive surgery to control that bleeding, and then stabilized him enough to keep him in our trauma ICU.
I know you probably had a lot of concern when you first saw him, but was there any primary concern you had?
Well, I thought he might not survive that night. I actually spoke to his wife. I was very concerned just due to how significant his high-grade liver injury was and how much blood he got transfused. But I think the fact that he got here as quick as he did, and we got him into the operating room as quickly as we did, played a role in, you know, keeping him alive in that first day. And, you know, after that, it was it was a long story. It was an ongoing struggle in a trauma ICU with normal take 1 step forward, 2 steps back type moves, but you know, it worked out, and we were able to keep his story going.
How many hours or days was it when you got that sense that things were going to be okay?
You know, it wasn't until the 3rd or 4th day that I had a better sense that he was going to be able to, you know, not have his story cut short. I still knew that it would be a long period of recovery due to the fact that he had 5 gunshot wounds and just a lot of injury, but I kind of had a feeling he would be able to pull through at about the 3rd day.
And were you day shift that day?
Yeah, I was day shift. He came in around 3 or 4 p.m. And I was day shift, but I stayed until midnight, you know, taking him to the operating room, back to the intensive care unit, to the operating room. I actually just stayed in the hospital with him. We were on lockdown, and I just stayed here due to how sick he was, and I just wanted to make sure there weren't any issues.
And once you finally got to leave work, how long was it until you came back?
So I just slept here that night, and then I was here the next morning at 7 a.m., and we were just continuing hawkishly looking over his condition, his labs, his vital signs, talking to his wife, making sure, you know, we had about, it felt like 70 armed officials here from his work, so just coordinating all the amount of support he had was also something that we were, you know, dealing with.
And I know the first few days he was fighting for his life, but when he was able to finally start interacting, what was that like? What type of interactions did you have with him?
I mean, some of those are interactions that he probably doesn't remember initially, because when you're in the ICU for about 2 weeks, intubated, you have medications dripping in, sedating you, you can get a little delirious. So initially, you know, he doesn't remember everything necessarily, but his wife does, his dad does. And then we just worked as quickly as we could to transition him to not as intense monitoring, to get him back to a normal baseline. And it was about 3 weeks out to where he was remembering things, talking, and just getting back to his normal self.
Seeing him here today, doing well, how does that make you feel?
Well, I mean, I don't focus on how it makes me feel. I think it's miraculous that he is here doing as well as he is. I'm happy for him and his wife. And, you know, it's not just about his story going forward. He had such a strong support system. It's his whole work crew. Like, he's such a vital part of his family, his community, that to lose anyone is, tragic, but he plays a pivotal role, I feel, in his whole community. So that part makes me feel good, I guess.
And you mentioned him spending a lot of time in the ICU, so I want to ask you some questions about that. Mm-hmm. Talk about the process of how critical it is when somebody is in the ICU and the type of care they have to receive, particularly Drew.
That one of the things we do here at Orange Park is we have one of our trauma surgeons dedicated to the ICU without any other responsibilities outside in other areas of the hospital. And the reason that is because patients like Drew that are in the ICU require a lot of constant attention. We also have a PA assigned to us in the ICU that assists us in addition to the surgeon that works in the ICU. And so one of us is pretty much parked in the ICU all day long, closely monitored, because in the ICU, things change on an hourly basis, especially in the first 72 to 96 hours where there's obviously a large loss of blood in this case, fluid shifts, chemical or electrolyte abnormalities, and these require constant attention. So, and what becomes one of the, as we moved along in this, one of the most important things we do in addition to the constant monitoring is just clear communication with family. People who have family members in an ICU often meet lots of doctors, you meet lots of specialists, you meet lots of people, and everybody may be telling you the same thing, but it may be said slightly differently, so people get different messages. And one of my jobs, driving the team in the ICU, is make sure the same message is communicated clearly to the family on a daily basis, so everybody's on the same page of the playbook, and we can set reasonable expectations every day.
What was you seeing him in the ICU, what was he like at the beginning, and then how did he progress, and what was that like for you to be able to see him improving day by day?
Well, I think, Dr. Sirakoglu nicely pointed out that when someone's in shock, like Drew was when he first came in, we actually intentionally keep them sedated and calm. So he was fairly well sedated for the first number of days until we could make sure everything was stable. And then he actually went through a fairly normal progression for somebody as sick as he was. Slowly you let them wake up towards the end of the first week and begin to interact, and then you start turning down the ventilator or breathing machine so they do more of the work of breathing on their own, and eventually then you get the breathing tube out, and then oftentimes they have a lot to say to you. Sometimes they don't really remember what's happened for the past week, and they sort of have to catch up for a couple of days to figure out what really happened to them.
Seeing him here today, and I'm sure you've seen him since before today, since he's gotten out of the hospital. What is that like? What does that mean?
Well, I think, it's a tribute to, the kind of shape that Drew was in. I mean, I think, if it weren't for the fact that he was in such good shape and physically active because of the demands of his job, somebody who wasn't in nearly a good shape or as young as Drew, may not have fared nearly as well. So part of it's just a tribute to the kind of physical condition he was in. It's a tribute to the support system that both from his wife, who was constantly at his bedside, and his coworkers who were supportive. I mean, I'm happy that, here he is in his jumpsuit today, and I fully anticipate he'll be able to get back to work and do what he likes to do. And this is the value of having a trauma center. And this is what trauma centers are supposed to be able to do for people.
How many total, I don't know if you might both know this, how many total surgeries did he have? Do you know?
Drew's showing me 10. To be honest with you, I didn't go back and look, so I couldn't tell the exact number of times he went to the OR.
But
numerous.
And would you call him a miracle?
I mean, a lot of moving parts go into making an outcome like this. It's not just one trauma surgeon and initially seeing him. It's not just someone in the ICU. It's the support staff at Orange Park. It's the amount of people that donate all the blood that he got. It's the amount of ancillary staff, people transporting him from ICU to the OR. Everyone plays a crucial role, and even the fact that the Publix where he was shot was only 15 minutes away from here. Traffic-wise, that was rush hour time. So if he has to go any farther than here at Orange Park, the story might have been different. It might have been altered. So there are a lot of moving parts, and it's really hard to say it's one thing over another, but everything together kind of gives us the masterpiece that is Drew right now.
Well said. Anything else you want to add?
No, I think Dr. Siracoglu summarized that nicely. Whether it's a miracle, fate, God's will, when everybody shows up, does their best, and does what they're supposed to do, as a high-level functioning trauma center, we can often, have successful outcomes like Drew's was. But at the end of the day, as I said earlier, if not for the fact that Drew's young, healthy, and as Dr. Siracoglu pointed out, fairly close to a trauma center, the outcome may have been differently. And if that's God's hand, then that's God's hand.
Anything else?
No,
I do think that, going back to that point, it's important to point out that in a city, which is basically the largest city in the United States land area-wise, being the only trauma center in this entire side of the city, certainly, going back to the point that was made earlier, it worked to Drew's advantage. If he had to travel to the other side of town again, the outcome could have been significantly different than it was. And I do believe that people need to understand this is what the value of a trauma center is. It's from the corporate level of HCA on down, the administration, Orange Park, really expending a lot of time and resource to put not just myself and Dr. Siracoglu and the other trauma surgeons in place, but all the other resources that are required to build a high-level trauma center for patients like Drew that are injured like this, to give them the opportunity for the type of outcome that Drew has had.